something says to them, it's time to really go full out. So that to me is just part of how you can understand yourself and get into components of full performance. It's also from a leadership capability building perspective, it's where you can help recognize that in somebody else, where maybe they might always be looking to you for the answers, like kind of, well, what do you think? And I can't really do that. And part of what you can do as a coach or a mentor is to turn that around and kind of say, hey, this is time for you to flip on your winner switch. Like, what do you want to do, right? What's your perspective? How can you take ownership of the situation in order to really meet the needs that you have clearly laid out before? This is your time to be taking action. And that's something I try to, teach my kids and really get into the mode. And it's intoxicating. Once you can do that, that's actually where you really can have much better performance.
And more impact.
Yeah, and definitely more impact as well.
We'll continue down that road. Break down, if you will, briefly the mastery mindset and maybe a story that you've witnessed about the process of someone turning their work around as a result of understanding.
I think for, the mastery mindset, like as we start to see where all of these things are connected, you care about making a change and making a difference in the world, and you really get, clarity, like this is what I want to do with my work. I'm interested in solving this particular problem. Then when you're building your body of work, you want to make sure that what you're building is something that where you're developing your own skills and your mastery, and you're also doing the very best that you can in order to solve the problem, like really moving forward in a big way. And I've seen this with a lot of folks that I've worked with over the years. One of my dear friends and former clients, Rachel Rogers, is a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And she started out, I think she worked for a larger law firm for maybe just a year out of law school. And for a lot of other lawyers, they work for a much longer period of time for some of the larger law firms. She really quickly saw that culture wasn't really one that was as interesting to her. And she was really interested in online businesses and, kind of the whole new world of work and intellectual property. And I just really saw her, first of all, embrace a way of operating as a lawyer, where she developed a virtual law office where she could be serving people virtually. So it wasn't the traditional law office. It was kind of breaking some of the molds around how law was really performed. And then she just began to get much more clear about the path that she was going on and the focus of her work. And she's really specialized and focused on being an expert in intellectual property and really understanding online businesses. She's hired other lawyers to work at her firm to grow her brand. And she's just a bright, bold, amazing, smart person, who just as each year passes, gets more strong, more capable, more audacious in the way that she works, because I think she has this mastery mindset of learning, investing in her growth, really being clear about how it is that she's connecting with her community and supporting her community. She's really smart the way she builds her business, just creating products and services that directly match the needs of the people who she wants to serve. And it just kind of reflects in the way that she operates. And she's not just satisfied to be having a business that's average and moving. Every year she's kind of raising the bar for what she's doing in terms of the quality of the work, but then also how it is that she's supporting and teaching the people around her.
Well, that's great. There was a term that I learned reading Body of Work that gave me another term to describe my own frustration when I'm just trying to focus on one or two subject areas of pursuit. A lot of creative people have difficulty establishing processes because they have so many, at least seemingly unrelated interests. What recommendations do you have to focus on processes that lead them to producing an impactful body of work of their own?
Yeah, well, really the person who came up with the term, and there's so many different ways of saying it, multi-potentialites, I think, is Emily Wapnick, who is at the site puttylike.com, is the person who I first heard that that term for. And she's just she did a TEDx talk that now has gotten over 1 million views, which is so fantastic. She was actually at our Portland workshop before her TEDx talk hit, so it was very exciting to kind of see that happen. But for a long time, she's been an advocate saying, if you have multiple interests, there's nothing wrong with you. Everybody in the world, including your family and advisors and everybody else, is telling you, you must focus, you must focus. And for people who are wired to have multiple interests, that is really terrible advice. They're not being lazy, they're not being unfocused. It is simply the way in which you're wired. And so there is a way that she's really explored very deeply in her body of work at puttylike.com, a way that you can help to then build your career path in a way that's in harmony with the way in which you're wired. And so in her TEDx talk, and maybe in the show notes or something, you can include a link to it. It's really great, very well done. But she talks about people who, for example, blend their different interests, their different interests they have from a lot of different fields into being very innovative in the way in which they solve problems. Or you might have people by their nature who are going to have a number of different career paths, and that's okay. They're never going to peg themselves as the person who will stay in one area forever, So knowing that about yourself, what a lot of people feel, I know, I shared that idea in Body of Work, and a lot of people just felt a lot of relief. First of all, that there's nothing wrong with you. If that's the way that you're wired, that's the way that you're wired. It does mean then that you have to operate in a little different way in order to be effective. So I think she's really the best person to be addressing some of those specific things. The advice I give with a lot of my clients who are multi-potentialites is that I joke with them, they have kind of the don't fence me in mentality, where when we start, I'm very big on focusing on what you're doing in the next 12 months. It's just my coaching orientation of getting clear about what it is that you want to build and create. So if you have multiple interests, if you focus on what it is that you are excited to do in a 12-month period, it doesn't mean that you're giving up a whole bunch of ideas that you might have. You might strategically say, the first quarter of the year, I'm really going to dig deep and focus on this area. And then the second quarter, I'll focus on the next one. And knowing that you do have a plan for how you're going to address things will stop you from thinking that you have to be doing all things at all times. Because that can be a downside when you are a multi-potentialite, is you're trying to do everything at the same time, and you just don't have the time, energy, or resources usually to do it well.
In my conversation with Charlie Gilkey, a close friend of yours, he was talking about the same thing, saying that for the next year you can have 10 or 15 objectives or big things that you want to do, and you'll probably accomplish 3 to 5 of them. So you might as well decide what are the 3 to 5 major things that I need to get done this year and just focus on them, as opposed to focusing on so many things that virtually nothing gets done well. That was a real kick to me.
Right.
Even hearing it, I still struggle with yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. And I try to think about focusing on the next 12 months, and there's some days it takes everything to focus on the next 12 minutes to see something through, because my mind is chasing the next squirrel and shiny object. So yes, it's both a comfort to understand that it's not uncommon, but again, try to learn processes to focus that and actually get the work done.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie personally has been just such a huge influence. We ran a retreat called Liftoff for 3 years together. We did it twice a year for groups of entrepreneurs, and he influenced me so much to understand that power of having focus. And actually, Seth Godin kind of had an interesting twist on it many years ago. I think it was actually the first time I met Seth in person. He was speaking it was part of his tour for his book, The Dip, and he came into Phoenix. And I had a lot of my clients who would ask me the question, this was probably, 2006 or something like that. And clients would say, how is it that I can, I have so many interests, and I feel like I'm giving something up when I'm focusing on one project. And he said, actually, that he is very similarly wired. But what he does is to use all of his different perspective and interests and multiple perspectives to focus in on one project that he's doing, right? So it's like, how can you, there's for all of us, the times where we are trying to do things that are against our nature, which always are going to be harder. And there are times where we actually can be focus on things that are in harmony with our nature, like focusing on a couple core priorities that you have high interest, passion, and skill for, right? And there's immediacy and a need to do it. But when you start to notice yourself that you get itchy and you want to move and you want to go into the next big thing, right? Then that's where you can say, this is a point now where I'm going to apply my multidimensional thinking into understanding how I might do this, right? What's a crazy new way that I might come up with in order to implement this part of this one project?
That's a good.
And I thought that was a really great way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Yeah, and I find myself having to do something similar. Again, trying to think of how to just my image word picture is to hold the magnifying glass still to burn through one place rather than keeping it moving, because my tendency has been much of my life to keep moving, and don't really make much of an impact in one area. Kind of hold the magnifying glass focused and still long enough to burn a hole. And once I got that image and started disciplining myself in that direction, I started seeing more work and better work come as a result of it. But boy, does it take conscious, thoughtful discipline to do it. So
it does. That's the mastery portion of it, right? That's walking through the uncomfortable part of, in the martial art metaphor, it's like going through all those times where you're tired and you don't want to go to class and you're doing 1,000 push-ups and you're, sparring with somebody who makes you super uncomfortable and you want to cry, and, all of those times, or trying to write a book and being completely up against the wall with writer's block and feeling not worthy and like an imposter, and like that is where the development happens.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true in relationships, right? You probably notice in long-term relationships, be it parental or romantic relationships, when you get to those difficult points, that's exactly in many cases where you need to be continuing to move through, to like feel deeply into the area of discomfort. That's when we develop the expertise. So it's for people who have multiple interests, again, you may not decide to develop the depth of expertise like my dad, who's kind of wired to be focused on photography, right? For like 55 years, that's been his main craft and his profession. And he, dives into it to a level of depth that few people will ever get to in their life, right? For the dimensions that he takes it.
Absolutely.
But that's because that's the way that he's wired. So somebody who has multiple interests may not go into it with that depth, but you can leave the size imprint or burn print, right? To build off your metaphor, that you want, that feels like success to you.
And also the pleasure that comes from seeing those different interests come together to gel sometimes in ways that they would not have, at least for me. Whether it's we have a farm, and sometimes when I'm doing work around the farm, whether it's splitting wood or repairing plumbing or whatever, I come up with ideas and images or thoughts about how to use one thing as a metaphor for something else, and that impacts my writing, which helps me think about a project that we're filming, and even the podcast. So from my perspective, I try to think of all of the different kind of skills or things that I'm doing and how it can inform, again, as a metaphor for something else, and find some pleasure in it, as opposed to in the past it just frustrated me at times. So it's helpful. Yeah. A lot of creative leaders focus entirely on the outcome or the results that come from their creative efforts rather than from the process of the efforts. At least for me, for a long time, I was outcome oriented as opposed to, again, thinking of the process of itself and enjoying it. From your experience, can you talk about how that affects or impacts people and their work over time when it's, again, just focused on results?
I think it depends on who the person is, that we have different values, we have different motivational triggers, and there are some of us, sounds like you and I included, who really need to enjoy the process as much as we enjoy the results. I mean, to me, that my definition of success is enjoying my life while I'm living it. That's my fundamental definition of success. That it matters to me that I wake up and I enjoy my life and I appreciate my life every day. Does it mean that I'm not doing hard things? No, absolutely not. I mean, very often I'm pushing myself into areas that are uncomfortable, but I'm fully awake and alive and enjoying that process. I have found in my work with many different kinds of people that not everybody is similarly motivated